She had worked in the Callaway Group's Harborside office for 3 years before anyone on the executive floor learned her name, and even then, it was only because the auditors had flagged a discrepancy she'd caught 6 weeks before they did. Isadora Fenn did not mind being invisible. Invisibility was, in fact, a skill she had cultivated with the same quiet precision she applied to every column of numbers that crossed her desk. She kept her dark hair pulled back. She wore cardigans in grey and navy and a particular shade of brown that the women upstairs called unfortunate. She brought her lunch in a paper bag and ate it at her desk, because the break room on the 4th floor had a way of making her feel like furniture, present, functional, and completely overlooked. She was the company's senior financial analyst. She was 29 years old. She had memorized the movement of every dollar through the Callaway Group's 14 subsidiaries, and she had known for approximately 8 months that at least 3 of those subsidiaries existed solely to move money that had no business being moved at all. She had not said anything about this. She was not stupid. The men who came to the 22nd floor in their dark coats and their careful silences were not the kind of men you said things to. They arrived at odd hours, always by the private elevator, always accompanied by a low-level assistant who never made eye contact with anyone below director level. They spoke quietly with Garrison. That was what she called him in her head. Garrison, though his business cards read G. Harwick, Chief Operations Officer. And then they left, and the numbers shifted in ways that required a particular kind of expertise to follow. Isadora followed them anyway. She couldn't help it. Numbers were her language, and these ones told a story. She just hadn't decided yet what to do about the story. It was a Thursday in late October when everything changed, and it changed the way catastrophes usually do. Without warning, with tremendous noise, and in a way that made everything before it seem impossibly ordinary. She was reconciling the 3rd quarter reports for Callaway Maritime when the office went quiet, not the usual end-of-day quiet, when the lights dimmed and the last of the admin team pulled on their coats and wished each other good night. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that precedes something. Isadora looked up from her screen, through the glass partition of her office. A small office, crammed between the IT closet and the stairwell, which she had been given 3 years ago and had never been offered anything better. She could see the main floor of the financial department. 4 other analysts, 2 were standing very still at their desks, looking toward the lobby. One had a phone pressed to her ear but was not speaking. The 4th was simply gone. Then the voices started. Loud voices, male voices, the kind that bounced off marble floors and glass walls and filled every corner of a space without effort, told him to pull the quarterly files, all of them, every Callaway subsidiary going back to 2019. Sir, those files are restricted access. I'm aware of what they are. I'm also aware that your COO has been siphoning $80,000 a month through your third-party logistics accounts for the past 2 years, which means the restricted access situation is about to become the least of your concerns. Isadora very slowly set down her pen. The man who stepped into her line of sight through the glass was tall. Tall in the way that certain men are tall, as though the room reorganized itself slightly to accommodate them. Dark coat, charcoal. Dark hair, slightly longer than boardroom standard. He moved the way powerful things move, without hurry, without waste, with a quality of attention that suggested he had already catalogued every exit, every face, every potential threat in the building before he'd cleared the lobby. 2 men flanked him. Behind them, a third, younger, with a tablet open in his hands and an expression of focused neutrality that she recognized immediately as the expression of someone who was very good at their job and very used to containing the consequences of other people's decisions. Garrison was speaking to the tall man in a voice pitched low enough that Isadora couldn't catch the words. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't working. The tall man was not looking at Garrison. He was looking with a quality of calm that was somehow more unsettling than fury at something beyond him. Then he looked directly at Isadora. She did not flinch. She had a talent for stillness, another cultivated skill, learned early, kept sharp. For exactly 3 seconds across the quiet office and through the glass partition, the two of them regarded each other. Then one of his men touched his arm and said something, and the tall man looked away, and Isadora realized that her heart was beating considerably faster than it had been a moment ago. She pulled her cardigan tighter, turned back to her screen, and pretended to type. His name, she learned in the next 48 hours, was Theo Rask. She learned this the way she learned most things, quietly, from the edges, by paying attention to what people didn't say as much as what they did. The name moved through the building in whispers. Rask, spoken with a particular kind of care, the way you speak a word you're not entirely sure is safe. He was not law enforcement. The 2 men from the RCMP who arrived Tuesday morning made that immediately apparent. They looked at the files Rask's people had already pulled and assembled and said, very carefully, that they appreciated the cooperation. And then they left. He owned the Calloway Group, or rather, Isadora had spent most of Tuesday night with a glass of wine and her personal laptop, following the chain of corporate structures that a less experienced analyst would have found impenetrable. He owned Meridian Holdings, which owned CG Capital Partners, which had majority stake in Calloway Group International. 3 layers of legitimate corporate structure, clean, efficient, and completely invisible to anyone who wasn't looking. He was 41 years old. He had been born in Winnipeg. He had attended Dalhousie for 1 year before disappearing from public records for the better part of a decade. Now he lived in Vancouver. He had offices in Montreal, Halifax, and Toronto. He did not give interviews. He did not attend industry events. He existed in the financial world as a kind of negative space. You could see the outline of him in the movement of capital and the behavior of other men, but the center was always dark. Isadora closed her laptop and sat for a long time in her kitchen, listening to the rain against the window of her apartment, up above a dry cleaner's on Barrington Street. She had been right about the money. She had been right about a great many things, it turned out. She was not sure that this was going to be good for her. She was right about that too. He came to her office on Wednesday afternoon. Not the main space, her office. He knocked, which surprised her, and then opened the door without waiting for an answer, which surprised her less. Isadora Fenn, he said. It was not a question. She noticed, distantly, that he pronounced it correctly. Most people put the emphasis on the wrong syllable, turning her name into something it wasn't. He said it the right way, like he had taken the time to find out. Yes, she said. He sat in the single spare chair across from her desk. His coat was different today, grey, not charcoal, but the quality of his attention was exactly the same. He looked at her the way she looked at balance sheets, like he was reading something. You flagged the logistics discrepancy, he said, in the maritime accounts. 6 weeks before the auditors. 7, she said. A pause. 7 weeks. I noted it in the internal system in the 3rd week of September. The auditor's report is dated November 4th. He looked at her for a moment longer. Why didn't you escalate it? I escalated it to my direct supervisor. He told me it was a rounding error and to leave it alone. And you left it alone. I documented it, she said carefully, and I did not leave it alone in my own records. But I also did not go over my supervisor's head to the executive floor. No, because? Isadora folded her hands on her desk. Her voice was very steady. She had been practicing steadiness her whole life. Because I had worked here for 3 years, and I was aware that the executive floor had a certain relationship with the irregularities I was tracking. And I am a $39,000 a year financial analyst who eats lunch at her desk, Mr. Rask. I chose to document and wait. Silence. How many accounts? He said. She reached into the second drawer of her desk, pulled out a printed document. 11 pages, single-spaced, and set it on the desk in front of him. 14 subsidiaries, 7 irregular, 82 transactions I flagged as potentially non-commercial over an 18-month period, totaling approximately $4.3 million in unaccounted movement. That's conservative, she paused. The real number is closer to 6. He looked at the document. He did not pick it up yet. He looked at her. You had all of this, he said. Yes, and you said nothing. I said what I could to the person I reported to. I documented everything else. I waited for someone with more leverage to ask the right question. Another silence. Longer this time. When Theo Rask reached forward and picked up her 11 pages, he handled them with the care of someone who recognized what he was holding. I'm going to need you to walk me through every one of these, he said. It was not a request. All right, said Isadora. I'll need coffee. It's going to take several hours. For the first time since he had walked into her office, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, more like the beginning of a recalibration. I'll have someone bring coffee, he said. 3 hours became 6. 6 became 8. By the time they had finished, the office was completely dark, except for the light above Isadora's desk. And the rain outside had turned to sleet, and she had consumed 4 cups of coffee and 1 granola bar that she had retrieved from the bottom of her bag, with a brief apology for her lack of hospitality, which had caused Rask's assistant, a lean, humorless man named Doyle, to look at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Rask himself said very little except when he needed clarification. He listened the way very few people listened. Completely, with his whole attention, without performing engagement. He asked questions that were precise and to the point, and when she answered them, he did not ask the same thing twice. She found, to her discomfort, that she respected this about him. At 8:47 in the evening, he closed the last file and sat back in the chair that had not been designed for a man of his dimensions and regarded her. You're very good at this, he said. I know, she said, because she did, and because a lifetime of minimizing herself in every other respect had made her protective of the one thing she was actually proud of. He studied her. Why are you still in this office? I'm sorry, this office. This building. This salary. He said it without judgment, which somehow made it worse. Someone with your skill set should be making twice what you make, minimum. Why are you here? Isadora looked at her desk. At the chipped edge of it, the scuff mark on the wall, where someone had dragged a filing cabinet years ago. The small cactus on the windowsill that she'd bought when she first got the job because she'd thought she might eventually get a window with natural light. I applied to other places, she said. I didn't always get the interviews. She left the rest of the sentence where it belonged. Unspoken, unnecessary. She was good at numbers. She was also a plus-size woman with a tendency to fade into backgrounds, and she had long since stopped being surprised by the mathematics of that particular equation. Rask said nothing, but he looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't categorize, and then he stood, pulled on his coat. I'll need you in the office tomorrow morning, he said. 7:30. I don't start until 9. 7:30, he repeated, and there was nothing unkind in it. It was simply a fact, the way weather was a fact, or gravity. Someone will arrange a car. He left. Doyle, who had been standing in the doorway for the last hour doing things on his tablet, followed. Isadora sat for a moment in the sudden quiet of her own office. Then she gathered her bag and her coat, turned off her lamp, and walked out into the empty building, and tried very hard not to think about the way Theo Rask had looked at her 11 pages like they were the most valuable thing he had held in a long time. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Isadora's professional life. Rask did not leave. This was apparently unusual. Doyle let this slip on the second day, with the toast of someone who had said more than they intended. Rask had come for what should have been a 2-day assessment and stayed. His team expanded. The 22nd floor, formerly the province of Garrison and his circle of quiet men, became something different entirely, quieter in some ways, more intensely focused, radiating a kind of controlled authority that Isadora could feel from her office 2 floors down. She went to him every morning at 7:30. She did not resent it as much as she'd expected to. The work was, in fact, the most interesting work she had done in years. She was untangling years of careful misdirection, finding the places where money had been made to disappear and then reappear wearing different clothes, and there was a particular satisfaction in it that she felt in her chest like a clean cord. Rask let her lead. This also surprised her. He sat across the table and listened and asked his precise questions, and did not once suggest that she had misread something, or missed something, or failed to consider something that he, with his greater experience, had already seen. He treated her expertise like a given. She was not used to being treated like a given. On the 9th day, she made an error. A small one, transposed digits in a cross-reference, but she caught it herself before he did, announced it flatly, corrected it, and moved on. He said, "Not to me," she said. "It happened just now." "I know, that's what I'm saying. It doesn't, and it did. I'm annoyed." Something crossed his face again, that almost not quite expression. "Noted," he said. She turned back to the screen. She was fairly certain that she was imagining the quality of his attention, the slight warmth in it, the thing that felt different from the focused, neutral gaze he turned on everything else. She had a talent for numbers, and a significantly less reliable talent for reading people. And she was not going to make assumptions. She was, however, increasingly aware that she thought about him on the drive home. This she filed under inconvenient, and did her best to set aside. On a Tuesday in the 3rd week, she would remember this later, the specific flatness of the afternoon light, the smell of coffee going cold. She left the building to collect a drive from the IT department on the 2nd floor of the annex, a task she had done herself, because everyone else on her floor was in a meeting she hadn't been invited to. She was crossing the underground parking level, head down against the cold that came through the concrete walls in October, when a hand closed around her arm. She had time to understand that it wasn't a friendly grip before the world went sideways. There were 2 of them. She registered this in the few seconds before something pressed against the back of her neck, and the lights went out. 2 men, both larger than her, both wearing the specific kind of ordinary clothing designed not to be remembered. One of them said something in a low voice. The other said her name, and that was the last thing she heard clearly before the cold concrete floor came up to meet her. She came back to consciousness in pieces, cold. That was the first thing. The kind of cold that sits in the bones, that comes from a concrete floor, and the absence of any insulation between your body and the industrial chill of a space not designed for human occupancy. She was sitting. Her hands were not tied. She tested this carefully before she opened her eyes, taking stock of what she could without moving too obviously. Hands free, feet free but heavy, like she'd been given something. Her head ached at the base of her skull. Her left cheek was swollen, and there was a tenderness along her ribs that suggested she'd been handled without care. She opened her eyes. A warehouse, high ceilings, poor lighting, the smell of salt water and engine oil, and the particular damp of something close to the harbor. Crates stacked in the middle distance, a door to her left. 3 men she didn't know standing in configurations that told her she was being watched, and standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the lapel of his coat. A coat she recognized, charcoal gray, the first one, was a man she had seen once at a function 3 years ago. His name came to her from the file she kept in her memory, the way she kept all her files. Organized, indexed, ready, Garrison's external contact, the one whose name never appeared in the accounts, but whose influence was visible in every anomalous transaction. "Miss Fenn," he said. He had a pleasant voice. She had always found that particular combination, pleasant voice, dangerous eyes, to be the most unsettling. We need to have a conversation about what you've been sharing with your new employer. Isadora's face hurt. Her ribs hurt. The base of her skull was a sustained, low throbbing. She looked at him and said, "I'd like a glass of water." He blinked. Whatever he had expected, it was not that. "I'm sorry. Water," she said. "My mouth tastes like concrete and whatever you gave me to knock me out. I'd like water, and then I'm happy to talk." The man stared at her for a moment. Then he looked at one of his people. A bottle of water appeared. Isadora drank half of it. She set the rest down on the floor beside the chair, and then she looked back at the man and waited. She was terrified. She was also very good at keeping her face still, and she understood, with the same clarity she applied to spreadsheets, that the most valuable thing she had in this room was the fact that they needed something from her. They needed to know what she'd told Rask. They needed to know what he had and what he planned to do with it. That made her a resource, not a liability. For now, she intended to be very clear about that distinction, and to extend it as long as she possibly could. It was Doyle who called Rask. He had gone looking for Isadora at 4 o'clock, because she had been gone for over an hour on a task that should have taken 15 minutes, and Doyle had spent enough time in enough rooms to recognize the absence of a specific person as a kind of language. Rask picked up before the second ring. Doyle said 2 sentences. The silence on the other end lasted approximately 4 seconds. "Which building?" Rask said. She had been in the warehouse for 2 hours and 40 minutes by the time she heard the exterior door. She knew it was him before she saw him. There was a particular quality to the disruption at the edges of the room. The way his men moved when they heard something. The way the energy in the space shifted from predatory to something closer to uncertain. And she had learned, in 3 weeks of close proximity, to read the shape of Theo Rask's effect on a room even before he entered it. He came through the door on the far side of the warehouse with 4 men and the controlled stillness of someone who had decided exactly what was about to happen and found no reason to hurry. The man in front of Isadora said something. His voice had lost a portion of its pleasantness. Rask looked past him. He looked at her face. She watched something happen in him, something that moved across his expression like weather across open water, fast and complete and then gone, replaced by a stillness that was somehow colder than anything she'd felt from him before. "Boss," said Doyle, from somewhere behind Rask's left shoulder. "I see it," Rask said. He wasn't looking at the man in the charcoal coat. He wasn't looking at the 3 men stationed around the room. He was looking at Isadora's face, at the swelling along her cheek, and the split at the corner of her lip, and the way she was holding herself carefully around the bruised ribs. She had tried not to make it obvious. But he was looking at her the way she looked at accounts, and she suspected he was adding up exactly what had happened. "Isadora," he said, quietly. "I'm fine," she said. It was not entirely true, but the important parts were true. They wanted to know what I'd shared with you. I told them that our conversations were confidential, and that any concerns about the scope of the investigation should be directed to legal counsel. Silence. "You told them that," said Rask. "I also told them that the water in this building tastes like the harbor, which is not a critique, just an observation." Doyle made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He stopped it very quickly. Rask walked toward her, past the man who had started talking again, louder now, more urgent. She couldn't focus on the words, because Rask was crouching in front of her chair, and his hands, careful, precise, the same hands she had watched move through documents, were checking the swelling along her jaw with a gentleness that was entirely at odds with everything else currently happening in the room. "Does it hurt to breathe?" he said. "A little. It's the ribs. It's not serious. Let me decide what's serious. I'm a grown woman, Isadora." His voice was low, not stern. Something else. "Let me look." She stopped talking. He examined the swelling, checked her pupils with the light from his phone, ran careful fingers along the side of her skull where it ached. She sat very still and looked at the middle distance and concentrated on breathing in a way that was not obviously controlled. Then he stood. He turned around. What happened next was not something Isadora watched in detail. She heard it. The quality of the room changed in a very specific way. The man who had been pleasant and dangerous said one thing, loudly, and then stopped saying things. There was a brief period of noise, voices, movement, something heavy connecting with something solid, and then it was quiet. Rask came back to her. He had removed his coat. He held it out. She looked at it. "You're cold," he said. She was. She had not realized until this moment how cold she had been for the past 2 hours. She had filed it under irrelevant. Deal with later, the way she filed many physical things. She took the coat. It was warm. It smelled like cedar, and something else she couldn't name. And it was very large. And she pulled it around her and did not say anything at all. He drove her to the hospital himself. She had told him this wasn't necessary. She was fine. 2 cracked ribs and a bruised face were survivable without emergency intervention. She had Advil at home and a bag of frozen peas. And he had listened to all of this with the expression of someone who had noted her input and arrived at a different conclusion, and then he had put her in the back of a car and sat beside her for the 15-minute drive while Doyle made phone calls in the front. At the hospital, he knew someone. She was not surprised by this. They took her to a private room and checked her over with a thoroughness that she suspected was only partly standard procedure. And Rask stood in the corner with his arms folded and answered questions she hadn't asked. And she let it happen because she was underneath the controlled breathing and the steady voice and the careful hands folded in her lap, exhausted and a little scared, and it was easier to be looked after than to argue. 3 hours later, sitting in the back seat of the car again, with 2 officially confirmed cracked ribs and a prescription she probably wouldn't fill, she turned to look at him. "How did you know where I was?" she said. "Doyle tracked your badge in the parking structure. The security feed showed you entering the annex stairwell. It went dark after that. He started making calls. You came yourself?" "Yes." She waited, but he did not offer anything further, and she let it sit. Outside, the city slid past in the dark. The harbor lights, the bridge, the particular nighttime geography of Halifax that she had learned, over 5 years, to read like a second language. "You didn't have to come yourself," she said. "No," he agreed. Another pause. "Why did you?" He was looking out the window. In profile, he was all angles and considered silences. She had learned, over 3 weeks, that Theo Rask did not say things he didn't mean, and did not say things he wasn't ready to say, and both of these were unusual enough in a person to be notable. "Because it was you," he said finally. She looked at him. He turned and met her eyes, and for a moment the car was very quiet, and the lights were very steady, and something that had been building for 3 weeks of 7:30 mornings and 8-hour sessions and coffee going cold sat between them like a question. "I see you," he said. It was not a grand declaration. It was very quiet, very still. The way he said everything that mattered. "I want you to understand that. I have seen you, quite clearly, since the first day I walked into that building." Isadora looked at him for a long time. "I eat lunch at my desk," she said. "I know. I have a cardigan in a color that apparently qualifies as a shade of brown. I'm aware. I am 32 years old and I have a cactus on my windowsill and a dry cleaning shop underneath my apartment, and I am." She stopped, looked down at her hands. "I'm not what you're looking at when you usually look at someone." "What I usually look at," Rask said, "is considerably less interesting, a beat, and considerably less capable of identifying $6 million in fraudulent transactions from a second-floor office with no natural light." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Her ribs protested. His hand, warm and unhurried, settled over hers on the seat. She didn't move away. She looked down at it, his large hand over her smaller one, and then she looked back up at him, and the thing between them stopped being a question. Garrison entered a guilty plea 11 weeks later on a Monday morning in February in a courtroom in downtown Halifax. 2 other men were charged. A third was cooperating. Isadora was not in the courtroom. She was, at that moment, in her new office. 6th floor, corner windows, natural light in the mornings that came in at a slant, and sat in gold pools on the floor, doing what she had always done best. Following the numbers, finding what was hidden, making sense of the things that looked like chaos. She had a different job now. The title was Senior Director of Financial Integrity for Meridian Holdings. The salary was, as Rask had suggested, approximately twice what she'd been making. She had stopped eating lunch at her desk, mostly because Doyle had a disconcerting habit of appearing in her doorway at 12:30. With a pointed expression that she'd eventually translated as "the boss wants you upstairs." The cactus had come with her. It lived on the corner of her new desk in the full morning light, and it had, in the past 3 months, produced a small and improbable bloom, pale yellow, smaller than her thumbnail, stubborn as anything. She was looking at it when Rask came in. He did not knock. He had stopped performing the courtesy of knocking somewhere around week 5, which she had chosen to interpret as familiarity rather than arrogance, and which subsequent evidence had supported. He came to stand beside her desk and looked at the cactus with the same quality of attention he gave everything. "It bloomed," he said. "Yesterday morning. I was going to tell you." He looked at her. The morning light was doing something to the line of his jaw, the grayed edges of his dark hair, and she had known him long enough now to read the expression he was wearing, the one that meant he had already decided something, and was giving her the courtesy of arriving at it herself. "What?" she said. "I want you to come to Vancouver," he said. "Permanently. The Meridian head office. You'd be running the full financial oversight division." She looked at her cactus, at the small yellow bloom, at the city visible through the window behind it, the harbour, the bridge, the particular February grey of Halifax that she had always found, despite everything, beautiful. "That's a significant ask," she said. "Yes, you could have led with dinner." The almost not quite expression, more definite now these days. She had started to be able to see it clearly. "I could have. I'm asking this first. Why?" "Because," he said, very quietly, "the dinner is contingent on the answer to this one." She turned to look at him fully. He was watching her with the directness that she had, over the past months, come to understand was not coldness at all. Was, in fact, the opposite of coldness, was the focused warmth of a man who gave his attention rarely and completely, and was giving it to her. "Yes," she said. He was still watching her. "To which part?" She looked at him, at the grey edges of his hair in the morning light, at the hands that had been careful with her in a warehouse, and careful with her 11 pages, and careful with everything that mattered. "Both," she said. Outside, the harbour moved in its slow February way, and the light came through the glass and sat warm on the floor between them and Isadora Fenn, who had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, and had discovered, in the end, that the right person would find her anyway, decided to be seen.